So hello and welcome to this Future Music Magazine video on the FEEDACK modules 1BIT Multitap Delay. Let's check out a little bit of what's to come before we get into the features and some patches. Where 32-bit floating point and high sample rates and big claims in terms of specs and the actual power and processing of digital units that are thrown around by companies these days, you may be wondering what relevance a 1-bit effects unit has. Well, a lot, because it's based on early digital designs from the 1980s. Units such as the Ursa or URSA Major, the Effectron and the ADA, which are all classic units that you can look up. Now they're simply a 1-bit analog to digital converter and digital to analog converter, and there's no CPU inside. It uses 64K SRAMs, which is something you'd commonly find in early computers like a Commodore or a ZX Spectrum. So with a bit of the history and where that 1-bit comes from out of the way, let's quickly run through the features and this patch. It sounds more like a BBD delay, kind of analog, warm, there's some tonal shaping on board, it gets noisy if we want, but we don't get that high-pitched clock whine, and it doesn't quite break up like, say, a PT-based delay either. So let's run through the features first. We're currently listening to this in stereo, with the 2 taps for this multi-tap delay, which are on these time switches, panned hard left and right. So make sure you've got some decent studio monitors on or some headphones. Running through the unit, have an input level, and we can drive this and get some nice character in there. And I'm just going to switch over to this mix output, which is in mono, which will pass the dry sound through. So input level, the level of tap 1, the level of tap 2, and the dry sound. Turning my delay down, so this is just dry, let's drive it a little bit. There's quite a nice clip distortion there as well. And that character passes through nicely into this delay line. With that turned down, we've then got feedback CV inputs for both taps and attenuators, feedback levels that we manually set, an off, soft or hard shaping. So let's go back into stereo. And just listen to that bit of noise on there at this longer delay time. That disappears at higher rates. And listen to the colour of this delay trail change. Here's soft on both sides. It's got this great warm feel to it. It just takes some of that kind of top end off. And then the hard setting really kind of dulls down these feedback trails. Again, kind of murky, underwater, warm delay. And that can be different per side. Really useful when we've got this noisy, pushed circuit that's kind of maybe longer than it wants to be, but it's trimmed so you can bring this noise and degradation in. We've got normal or inverted switches for these feedback paths, which do change the kind of clipping and colour and the way that these delays and the dry sound interact. Time on this big knob, as you've seen. A tap control from times 1 through 8 on both sides. So if I change that, they're both on times 1. We start to get some nice stereo imaging. There's a great loop function with an LED to tell us when this is on. Or momentary, we can gate this. Or a switch. and loop it. There is a gate input for that. We've got onboard modulation with an onboard LFO. It's a triangle style LFO with a depth and rate. Push that into destruction. We get typical bendy pitch moving delay effects. Now just a little bit of this. Certainly against that dry sound, let's bring that back in. To get these gorgeous kind of almost vibrato-like warbles. Adds to the warmth of the unit when you play with the soft or hard EQ shaping curves as well. There's an external input as well, which you've got a level control of for the delay time. And simply a switch on that modulation to select no modulation, the internal LFO or external. So that's the controls. We've heard it here in mono with these 2 taps and the delay mixed. Or in stereo. That great drive. So let's get into some different patches and see how we can really make use of this 1-bit multitap delay from FEEDACK modules. So this patch is set up just to demo a few different things at once. The sound that's coming into the 1-bit multitap delay is already quite saturated. You can see with this input level backed off, that's not where the clipping's coming from. I can drive it. And get some clipped out tones. But as I said, this patch is set up for a few different kind of tips and tricks, if you like. Again, I'm taking these two, tap 1 and tap 2, out in stereo. That's all we're listening to. I can pull the mix out of the module altogether. Both taps up, minimal feedback, but I have an LFO here, just completely unsynced, just random triangle LFO from somewhere in my case. And I have an inverted version into these 2 different feedback ins. So as the feedback on tap 1 rises, the feedback on tap 2 is going to come down, and vice versa. It's the same LFO but an inverted version. I'm also using a kind of random gate pattern following my sequence to randomly lock this loop, and you can see it's turning on and off with the gate length and this random gate. That's kind of freezing bits of this feedback looping around, and I've got just the tiniest bit of internal modulation, just kind of flicking the edge of that pot just to get this tiny bit of pitch drift. So just listen to these delay trails. With the longer feedback, you can just hear this slight pitch down or pitch up effects, like a slow vibrato. So with the inverted LFO giving us this kind of stereo swirling feedback between the 2 different taps, the random gate freezing bits of this, and the internal modulation. I also wanted to go through these switches. Again, we can invert this, which is going to change the sound. I could come off of the soft tonal change, let more high end through, a bit more of that noise. It's got such a great character. Or flick it down to hard, which is harder top end roll off. Turning the dry signal off in those 2 tap outputs. Just those little things that I've done to this just give us this nice moving, warm, alive, very analog sounding delay. So here I'm using shorter delay times and the onboard modulation to create a kind of chorus, vibrato, metallic kind of backdrop for this melody. Now I've over-egged the modulation a little bit just to make it really obvious for the video, but we'll back that off to a slightly more subtle setting shortly. Now let's break down this patch. I can pull the modulation of feedback. Turn those 2 taps down. Again, tap 1 and tap 2 here in stereo, hard left and right. Here's my dry sound. There's a little bit of fuzz on the input, but that's certainly not from the input of this module. I've backed the input off to take away any kind of drive. Now turning off the modulation, here's the two taps. Enough feedback to kind of make this ring nicely in stereo. And with internal modulation, we can hear that pitch shifting, and you could really obviously hear how much colour was changing there on the soft or hard shaping. Hard's much more suited for this, I think. Get rid of all that top end. So backing off the depth, I'm using some sample and hold and an LFO to modulate the feedback for each tap. And you can hear this kind of ringy, just pitch drifting thing. I'm going to turn the feedback up a little bit more. Bring that dry sound back in. So it makes for a great kind of chorus and vibrato like modulation source as well. So continuing with the idea of kind of spacious chorus vibrato like kind of pitch drifts, here's just a droning oscillator straight in, the delay's turned down, and we're just coming out in stereo again, but as it's just the dry passing through, it's simply mono. Let's just have a quick listen. Now listen to the modulation and width and almost kind of reverberance that we can add to this. And there's some kind of flange-like reverberance, chorus vibrato-like effects. And again, it's this shorter delay time, different tap divisions on the two different tap outs, and the internal LFO modulating delay time. Quite a bit of feedback, but we could back that off. For a softer kind of doubling style effect. So that's just a little bit more of this kind of mono in, stereo out, nice pitch moving, reverberant modulation at faster delay times. So for this final patch, I'm using some external modulation of both the looping on and off, which is a random gate, and some random stepped modulation, which is a quarter note sample and hold signal, into the external modulation. External modulation turned up, modulation switched to external, and that's controlling the delay time, ragging it into these longer times, giving us these crunchy, noisy textures, and that looping, grabbing little bits of that delay buffer, and giving us stutters and glitch-like effects. I've got the soft shaping on. Which just takes the edge off that top end. I'm just going to let this play out. Thanks for checking out this video on the FEEDACK module's 1BIT Multitap Delay. Be sure to check out other modular monthly videos from Future Music right on this channel. Cheers for watching.